When fake HOA cops dragged my pregnant wife out of our house, I snapped. I didn't just stand there. My combat training kicked in. Watch how I took control of the situation and turned the tables on them. You won't believe what happened next. The morning began like any other in the quiet neighborhood. Quiet in the way only a place ruled by a power-hungry HOA could be. Everything looked calm from the outside, trimmed bushes and freshly pressure-washed sidewalks. But underneath that fake perfection, the community pulsed with tension. For months, the HOA board had been escalating their behavior, expanding their authority beyond anything written in the bylaws, inventing rules out of thin air, and enforcing them with the confidence of people who thought they'd never be challenged. My wife and I had been targets for weeks, singled out because we refused to let them bully us into compliance. And in their eyes, non-compliance meant war. That morning, I wasn't home when it all happened. I was out on a short supply run, something quick enough that I didn't think twice about leaving. My wife stayed back, finishing up garden work, tending to the small patch of tomatoes she had poured her heart into all spring. The neighborhood was quiet except for the occasional dog bark and the rumble of a landscaping truck in the distance. Nothing suggested that anything unusual was about to unfold. But while I was gone, a blacked-out SUV rolled slowly through the neighborhood, creeping along the street like a predator studying its prey. The vehicle bore no official insignia, just a bold white decal on the side that read, HOA Compliance Enforcement. Anyone unfamiliar might have mistaken it for a private security unit or some kind of sanctioned authority. But it wasn't. This was a group of volunteers from the HOA pretending to be something they weren't, arming themselves with fake ranks, fake uniforms, and a sense of power they had no legal right to wield. My wife didn't notice the vehicle at first. She was kneeling in the garden, hands in the soil, focused on her plants. The SUV parked directly in front of our driveway, blocking access entirely. Its doors swung open, and 3 men stepped out wearing dark tactical-style outfits. Black boots, black vests, patched badges, and radios clipped to their shoulders. Their appearance was intentionally intimidating, crafted to strike fear in anyone who crossed their path. But they weren't law enforcement. They were HOA volunteers acting like a private militia. As they crossed the lawn toward her, the men moved with the overconfidence of people who believed their costume gave them authority. They didn't approach like neighbors. They approached like raiders. Their boots crushed the flower beds she spent months nurturing, flattening the petals beneath their weight. She rose slowly, unsure what was happening, but her confusion didn't matter to them. They had already decided how this was going to go. They claimed there had been multiple violations, that she was resisting compliance, that she needed to cooperate immediately. Their words held no legal weight, but they barked their accusations as if they were reading from a rulebook made of steel. When she tried to step back, their impatience grew. They stepped closer, too close. One reached for her arm. Another positioned himself behind her. They didn't come to give a warning, they came to force submission. The moment one man grabbed her, everything shifted. She fought to pull away, startled and terrified, but they tightened their grip. It escalated with shocking speed, too fast for her to think, too fast for her to run. They dragged her across the grass, her feet scraping against the ground, her hands reaching for anything to stop them. The garden tools fell from her grip, scattered in the dirt. The tomato vines she worked so hard to keep upright tore as she was yanked past them. It was in that moment, unknown to them, that they crossed a line they could never uncross. While they forced her toward their SUV, a neighbor filmed everything from behind a fence, too afraid to intervene but too horrified to look away. The footage later revealed the raw brutality of what they did. How they twisted her arm behind her back, how one pushed her down when she resisted, how another barked orders like a drill sergeant trying to break a recruit. They acted like they owned her, like the HOA owned the entire neighborhood, like they were untouchable. But they didn't know who I was. They didn't know the training I carried. They didn't know what would happen when I returned. As they dragged my wife toward the SUV, believing they were untouchable behind their fake badges, I was already turning onto our street, unaware of the scene unfolding ahead, but moments away from seeing everything. And when I did, everything inside me shifted from calm to lethal clarity. This was no longer a neighborhood dispute. This was an attack. And I was trained for exactly this kind of situation. My combat instincts hadn't been needed in years, but they were about to wake up instantly. The first 5 minutes after they dragged my wife away were a blur of noise, rage, and pure instinct. I tore into that fake HOA patrol like a storm, fists and elbows moving before my mind could catch up. The moment I realized my wife was safe inside the house, my brain finally switched from combat mode to analysis mode. And what I saw troubled me even more than their aggression. These men weren't scared of me. They expected resistance. They were trained for it. 2 of them moved with the rigid stance of law enforcement washouts. Feet planted, hands twitching near their belts. But their belts didn't have normal HOA gear. No citation books. No parking stickers. No community compliance tools. They had zip ties. Industrial grade ones. I've used those exact ones in field operations overseas. And then there was the SUV. I stepped closer, scanning it with the same eyes I used when identifying hostile vehicles back in service. At first glance, it looked like a typical HOA neighborhood safety truck. White paint, black lettering light bar on top. But the letters said, HOA Enforcement Unit 7A. Enforcement. Units. Numbers? HOAs don't have units. They have volunteers. Maybe one guy with a clipboard and a golf cart. I wiped some dust off the door with my sleeve. What looked like painted letters were actually vinyl stickers, slapped on haphazardly. And beneath the stickers, I saw the faint ghost of the original wording.
Kunti Sherifo.
The rest was torn away. My stomach tightened. These weren't just fake HOA cops. These were men with access to seized sheriff vehicles. I pulled my phone out and snapped photos of everything, the plates, the VIN, the uniforms, the patches. The patches bothered me the most. Dark blue shields with the words, Property Protection Division, Private Contracted Enforcement, and underneath, Authorized to Escalate. What HOA on earth authorizes escalation? I could feel something cold crawling up my spine. Someone hired these men. Someone with money. Someone with reach. Someone who wanted people to believe they were law enforcement, but didn't want actual law enforcement involved. But why my house? Why my wife? Why today? I opened the SUV door and leaned inside. The console was torn out and replaced with a radio system far more military grade than anything civilian patrols use. Thick secure wiring. Signal encryption module. Bulletproof laptop mount. The laptop was gone, ripped free with the bolts still warm. Someone wiped this vehicle clean before they fled. Then I noticed something wedged tight under the passenger seat. I reached in and pulled it free. A file folder. No name. Just a number. 19C. Inside. Satellite photos. Property maps. Photos of my land. Photos of my wife. Photos of me. Long-range shots from the tree line behind our house. They had been watching us for weeks. My heartbeat slowed. Not from fear, but calculation. This wasn't random harassment. This wasn't a Karen calling HOA thugs. This was organized surveillance. The last page made my jaw tighten. Subject 19C. Possible hostile. Prior military. Approach with force if necessary. That was me. Someone labeled me a hostile. Someone expected me to fight back. Someone wanted me neutralized. Before I could make sense of it, I heard gravel crunching near the tree line. Very soft. Very slow. Not panicked like the men who ran earlier. Someone was watching me. I didn't turn toward the sound. Instead, I casually lowered the file and pretended to examine the SUV's tires. My left hand slid into the back of my waistband where I still carried my concealed weapon. Another crunch, closer now. Whoever it was, they were trying to approach quietly. But they weren't good enough. I stood, wiped my hands on my jeans, and walked toward the house, pretending I didn't notice. The crunches stopped. Then a voice, calm, older, steady. Don't turn around, the man said. And don't draw. I'm not here to hurt you. My pulse slowed. Not fear assessment. I knew that voice type. Law enforcement. But maybe ex-law enforcement. And by the tone, someone who'd been doing this longer than me. I kept my hands visible and spoke low. You were watching the whole thing? I saw enough, the man replied. Those weren't HOA. They weren't even pretending well. He exhaled sharply. There's something worse. What are they? I asked. There was a long pause. Private enforcers, he finally said. Off-books. Contracted by people who own land and want more. His voice tightened. This valley's been getting bought up piece by piece. Anyone who resists gets pressured. And they thought dragging my wife was pressure? No, he said quietly. That was a warning. The real pressure comes next. My jaw clenched. What do you know about them? More gravel shifting. He was circling behind me, probably checking sight lines. They call themselves the Community Compliance Task Unit, CCTU. He spat on the ground. But locals call them what they really are. And what's that? He answered with a tone that made the back of my neck tighten. Land sharks with badges. The wind cut through the trees, carrying dust and tension. They were supposed to scare you, the man continued. But you fought. That wasn't part of their script. They'll come back with double the manpower and a legal excuse. They picked the wrong house, I said. No, he replied. They picked the right one. The one they need. Something clicked in my mind. The maps, the files, the satellite images. They weren't targeting the street. Not the neighborhood. Not the community. Just my property. There is only one reason men like that target a single rural property. There is something under my land they want. Finally, I turned around, slow and deliberate. The man stepped out of the shadows. Weathered face. Gray beard. Old sheriff jacket with the patch removed. Hands empty. Eyes alert. He gave a thin, grim smile. Name's Turner, he said. Retired deputy. I've been tracking these bastards for months. And you, son. He looked at the demolished SUV behind me. You just became their #1 target. I didn't flinch. Good. Let them come. Because now I wanted answers. And I always get answers. The house felt different that night. Heavier somehow. As though the quiet itself had shifted into something living and watching. The family tried to settle. But every sound pressed against the walls with unnatural weight. The sun had long fallen, leaving the neighborhood drenched in the kind of darkness that swallowed every logical explanation. Nothing moved outside except faint shadows cast by the swaying treeline, stretching long across the yard like reaching arms. Inside, the atmosphere thickened into an uneasy silence, each member sensing that the fake HOA officers had not given up but were merely regrouping, waiting for the moment the family would let their guard fall. The house lights glowed warm, but even that brightness felt fragile, as if it could be snuffed out by the slightest whisper from the night. The father moved room to room, checking windows, the weight of the earlier assault replaying in his mind. His wife sat near the living room window, her posture tense, eyes tracing every shift in the dark. Their son, still bruised, still silent, remained near the kitchen doorway, listening for anything that might hint at another intrusion. The house felt like a bunker, and the threat outside wasn't abstract anymore. It was precise, organized, and boldly unafraid of consequences. The memory of the fake officer dragging his wife still pulsed through him like an electric current, fueling an anger that had stopped feeling like fear hours ago. Sometime near midnight, a faint vibration hummed through the walls. At first it seemed like the normal settling of the house, but the rhythm was too controlled, too steady. A low mechanical thrum followed, far away, but closing in. The father froze, head tilting toward the window, trying to separate real danger from paranoia. But then the vibration grew, shaking a picture frame on the wall. His instincts sharpened. Something was moving outside. Something big. And it wasn't alone. He crossed to the living room window and pulled the curtain by a fraction. At first he saw nothing but darkness and the faint shine of the streetlights. Then the black behind the trees shifted. Something metallic glinted. The shape of a vehicle rolled into view, no headlights, no plates visible. Another emerged behind it. And another. 3 dark SUVs crawled forward in near silence, tires crunching gravel so slowly that the sound seemed intentionally muted. Their windows were pitch black, and the engines vibrated with a low growl that sank straight into the gut. This was no ordinary intimidation visit. This was a coordinated return. The father's breath steadied, not from calm but from the deep, silent focus of a man preparing for impact. Learning its layout, the father whispered for his wife and son to stay in the interior hallway, where there were no windows. The tension grew thick enough to taste. Every footstep outside made the air inside feel tighter, like an invisible rope pulling around the family's lungs. Then came the crunch of boots on the porch. One of the men was standing directly at the front door. His shadow moved across the frosted glass. Tall, wide, confident. He didn't knock. He didn't speak. He simply stood there, breathing slowly, his silhouette rising and falling with the rhythm of a man who had done this countless times before. His hand moved not to the doorknob, but to his belt. Something metallic shifted. The father's heart pounded once. Hard. The wife covered her mouth to stifle a gasp. The son leaned forward slightly, eyes blazing with anger instead of fear. Suddenly the shadow stepped back, and a harsh metallic clank crashed against the front door. Something heavy, something blunt. The wood vibrated violently. The fake officer was testing the durability of the frame, assessing how many hits it would take to break through. The father stepped forward and braced himself behind the wall. He listened to the rhythm, one hit, pause, like the man was calculating. Then the hit stopped. The silence returned so suddenly it felt unnatural. The father peered out the side window in time to see the man raise a small device to his ear. A radio. The father didn't need to hear the words to understand the meaning. They were coordinating a breach. But before the man at the front door could make his next move, something changed. A sound rose from the distance. Not loud, but sharp and unmistakable. Tires skidding. A vehicle accelerating. Not toward the house, away from it. One of the dark SUVs peeled backward violently, fishtailing on the gravel. Another engine roared to life near the treeline. The men outside reacted instantly, pulling back into a formation that suggested retreat rather than attack. The father peeked again and saw a flashing light in the far distance. Blue and red flickers faintly echoed off the houses. Someone had reported suspicious activity, or maybe one of the neighbors, rattled by the earlier incident, had finally stepped beyond their silence. Within seconds, the intruders retreated with startling efficiency. They didn't run. They didn't panic. They withdrew with the cold discipline of men who understood timing better than fear. Doors slammed shut. Engines revved. And then the SUVs vanished into the night as quickly as they came, melting into the dark road before any cruiser could arrive. The father exhaled shakily. The quiet that followed was haunting. Not peaceful, but unfinished. The family had survived the second encounter. But the message was clear. This wasn't over. This wasn't random. And whatever these men wanted, they were willing to escalate far beyond intimidation. The danger had grown. And now, so had the father's determination. Morning arrived without warmth. The sun climbed above the neighborhood, but its light did nothing to ease the tension that had seeped into the house overnight. The previous night's retreat by the fake officers left the family suspended somewhere between relief and dread. They knew they had avoided immediate disaster, yet the danger hadn't dissolved. It had simply slipped underground, regrouping where eyes could not follow. The father barely slept, mind spinning through each detail. Their uniforms, their coordination, the way they moved like trained units rather than rogue troublemakers. They weren't hooligans. They weren't petty criminals. They were part of something organized. Something that believed it had enough power to rule a quiet suburban neighborhood without fear of exposure. The father rose early, checking the doors, the windows, and the yard, documenting everything with the calm precision of someone preparing for war. His wife joined him with a silent look that carried the weight of unspoken questions. The son, though bruised and exhausted, moved with a sharper awareness than ever before. The attack on his mother had fundamentally changed something inside him. He no longer felt like just the victim of a staged HOA enforcement. He felt like a witness to something far darker. Together, the family stood in the living room as morning light filled the space, each of them waiting for the inevitable conversation that hung between them. It was the father who finally broke the silence. He explained his belief that these men were not simply impersonators with bad intentions but part of a coordinated network hiding behind the HOA's facade. It wouldn't have been the first time a rogue board partnered with private security contractors or shady enforcement groups to keep the neighborhood under tight control. But this was beyond excessive enforcement. This was surveillance, intimidation, kidnapping attempts, and nighttime tactical movements. And none of it made sense unless the HOA was hiding something massive, something worth protecting with brute force. The family gathered at the kitchen table, piecing together every detail from the past weeks. Suspicious letters on HOA letterhead demanding unusual compliance. Fines that appeared without explanation, then disappeared just as suddenly when the family asked for verification. Claims of broken neighborhood policies that the HOA refused to show in writing. Unmarked cars parked near the property on multiple nights long before the attack on the wife. It all aligned too neatly. Someone had been watching them long before the fake officers showed up. The father took out old HOA notices, scanning for patterns. Names, signatures, timing. A single signature appeared on every questionable document. The HOA vice president, a man they had never met in person despite his alleged involvement in every major decision. The father decided the investigation had to move forward immediately. Waiting for another nighttime intrusion would be reckless. He left the house to gather evidence from the neighborhood, moving with quiet determination. He walked the streets, tracing recent tire marks, counting cameras, and discreetly observing the houses of key HOA members. His instincts sharpened as he noticed something odd. Several board members' houses had high-end security systems far beyond normal consumer models. Some even had reinforced door frames and tinted windows not typical for suburban living. Most people installed home security for protection. These installations felt like preparation for exposure, retaliation, or intrusion. Whatever the HOA was hiding wasn't small. At the end of the street stood the vice president's home. Large, modern, and unusually isolated on a corner lot. It looked more like a fortified office than a residence. The father observed the property from across the street. A luxury SUV sat in the driveway, polished and spotless, with tires designed for off-road handling. Behind the house, nearly hidden, was a private shed with industrial-grade locks. Something about the setup felt wrong for a neighborhood official overseeing landscaping disputes and trash bin violations. Something about it screamed, Operation Base. Suddenly, the father noticed movement behind the tinted window. A silhouette, tall, rigid, purposeful, stood motionless as though staring directly at him. The father's pulse quickened, but he forced himself to continue walking calmly. He had seen enough. The HOA vice president wasn't just signing documents. He was orchestrating something bigger, and the fake officers were part of his network. When the father returned home, the family regrouped. He explained everything he had seen, and their suspicions solidified. This wasn't just abuse of power. This was a criminal structure using the HOA as a shield. If the family exposed the truth, they would disrupt something profitable, something coordinated, something dangerous. They began gathering evidence systematically. The son digitized all HOA documents, storing them in multiple encrypted files. The wife recorded detailed accounts of her assault, the fake badges, and the attempted intrusion. The father compiled photographs, timestamps, tire tracks, and notes. Everything they touched transformed from fear into fuel, proof that they could use later. Hours passed in a quiet but relentless rhythm. By late afternoon, they had assembled a substantial file. But the father knew evidence alone wouldn't protect them. They needed allies, real law enforcement, not local officers who shrugged off suspicious activity as miscommunication. They needed someone who could see through the HOA's polished image and recognize the tactical patterns for what they were. A coordinated intimidation group masquerading under neighborhood authority. The father called an old friend, one who worked in federal enforcement, someone he trusted. But as soon as he mentioned the HOA, the friend's tone shifted. His friend had heard of similar cases across the country, small, quiet, well-funded HOA boards acting as the public face of private security groups involved in land disputes, intimidation, and covert operations. According to him, these operations weren't random. They targeted neighborhoods with valuable land or properties involved in lawsuits. And the father's home, recently appraised at 3 times its previous value and situated on a piece of land the HOA had been eyeing for community redevelopment, fit the pattern perfectly. The friend warned him, if they've already escalated to impersonation and assault, they won't stop. They're trying to break you before making an official move on the property. Then his friend said he would send someone trained, discreet, and capable, but it would take time. The father hung up with a sudden sinking realization. The family was truly alone until help arrived. As evening approached, the house filled with a heavy, suffocating quiet. The sun dipped low, shadows stretching across the yard like dark fingers. Every noise outside felt amplified. A shifting branch, a distant engine, the low howl of wind brushing against the siding. The wife secured the back door with reinforced bars. The son positioned himself where he could see every entry point. The father gathered the evidence and kept it close. But the quiet broke just after sunset. 2 quick taps hit the glass of the living room window. Not like last time. This rhythm was different.
Top, 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 top.
A signal. Pattern. A warning. The family froze. Something moved outside, but not with the stealth of the previous night. This was slower. More deliberate. It wasn't an attack. It was reconnaissance. A shadow passed across the yard. Tall, broad-shouldered, and familiar. One of the fake officers had come alone. He wasn't approaching with force. He was approaching with purpose. He wasn't scouting. He was sending a message. The father stepped back, pulse pounding. The realization hit him like a shockwave. The HOA wasn't planning to intimidate them anymore. They were preparing for their final move. Night descended with a suffocating heaviness, settling over the neighborhood like a weighted shroud. The street lamps flickered weakly, stretching pale yellow light across empty sidewalks that seemed too still, too quiet, as if the entire community was collectively holding its breath. The family inside the house felt the shift immediately. Something was coming. The air had changed. Even the wind sounded different as it dragged slowly through the trees. It wasn't just fear anymore. It was the instinctual awareness of a predator drawing closer. The father positioned himself near the dining room window, keeping the blinds cracked just enough to watch the street without revealing movement inside. The son stood at the hallway entrance, eyes fixed on the front door, posture straight, shoulders squared, mind sharpened by his tactical training. The wife remained close but alert, moving between rooms, checking locks, adjusting curtains, ensuring every potential entry point was covered. Even in silence, they worked as a coordinated unit, bound tightly by the shared knowledge that danger was no longer hypothetical. It was in motion. For several long minutes, nothing happened. Just the low hum of electricity, the soft ticking of the thermostat, and the rhythmic thump of 3 hearts beating too fast. The suspense was its own kind of assault. Then, without warning, the street shifted. A cluster of shadows appeared at the far corner. Slowly bleeding into view under the dim street lamp glow, they formed the shapes of men. Tall, rigid, and moving with formation discipline. It wasn't one officer this time. It was a group. The father counted 6. The son counted 8. The wife counted 9. Their numbers shifted as bodies moved in and out of fractured light, but the message was unmistakable. This was no scouting visit. This was a coordinated event. They were returning to finish what they had started, and this time they were not hiding in the illusion of lawful authority. Their uniforms were darker, their movements tighter, their intentions unmistakably hostile. The group paused at the intersection, scanning the area with a level of professionalism that set off alarms in the father's mind. These weren't neighborhood enforcers. These weren't private security contractors with inflated ego and poor training. They were too synchronized, too disciplined, too prepared. Every step, every hand signal, every shift in posture fit the pattern of a tactical squad. Not one that protected communities, but one that executed covert objectives in silence. The father watched one of the men raise a hand, signaling the group to hold. The others froze instantly, like machines awaiting direction. The man in front surveyed the row of houses with slow, precise movements. He wasn't looking for trouble. He was confirming something he already knew. The father could feel his stomach twist as the man's gaze landed directly on their house. It lingered, cold and calculating, before he raised 2 fingers. 2. A number. Command. The squad moved. They split into 2 teams. One group advanced along the sidewalk, keeping close to hedges and parked cars. The other moved through side yards, slipping between houses like shadows cutting across moonlight. Their formation was surgical, methodical, practiced, almost military. The son recognized the structure instantly. It was the kind of pincer movement used to trap a target from multiple angles, ensuring no escape. The family wasn't dealing with imposters anymore. They were dealing with professionals. Inside the house, tension thickened into something nearly tangible. The father stepped away from the window, his jaw set, his mind running through every scenario he had trained himself to consider. The son shifted his stance, preparing for breach tactics he had studied for years. The wife, though afraid, steadied herself at the hallway corner, refusing to be a passive victim in the unfolding storm. They were outnumbered, outpowered, and outpositioned, but they refused to be caught unaware. The first sound came from the backyard. A soft clink, metal brushing metal. Then another. The father imagined gloved hands testing the fence, probing for weak points. A moment later came a faint scrape, the subtle vibration of weight pressing against a wooden barrier. They were checking for entry, testing integrity, studying the structure of the home the same way predators tested the perimeter of prey before striking. Movement followed immediately on the opposite side of the house. Faster, heavier, more decisive. Footsteps crushed dry leaves. Shadows moved past the window. A flashlight beam traced along the siding for a split second before flicking off, as if confirming a detail they needed to remember. It became clear then. They weren't just surrounding the house. They were mapping it. The son motioned for the father to join him near the living room. The father brought the packet of evidence they had prepared, the documents, the photographs, the recordings. If the worst happened, the evidence needed to survive even if they didn't. They placed it in a secure metal box by the back exit. Every movement was silent, fluid, and controlled, as though they had trained for this moment all their lives. Minutes passed in a slow-motion echo of dread. The squad outside continued to close in, tightening the perimeter with an unspoken strategy. The father realized suddenly that there were no HOA vehicles, no fake patrol cars, no ridiculous decals or counterfeit badges. These men had come stripped of the HOA facade. They weren't pretending anymore. Whatever the pretense of neighborhood enforcement had been before was gone. There was no shield of legality here, no attempt to mimic authority. This was the HOA's real face, raw, exposed, and unmistakably criminal. A sudden thud at the back door shattered the silence. Not a full strike, a test hit, enough to gauge reinforcement, structure, and resistance. Another thud followed, harder. The son inhaled slowly, recognizing the pattern, testing weak points before breaching. Before the next strike came, another noise cut through the night. Car engine. But not from the street. Not from the front. This engine approached from behind the house, roaring across dirt and gravel with aggressive speed. Headlights flashed through the window, high and bright, sweeping across the living room in a sudden burst of white. The squad outside froze. Their movements halted mid-stride. The sound of tires skidding tore through the night, followed by the crunch of gravel as the vehicle locked into place. Then another engine. And another. Multiple vehicles approached from different angles. Rapid, coordinated, powerful. The fake officers turned sharply, suddenly losing formation for the first time. Confusion disrupted their movements. Hesitation rippled through their ranks. They were no longer predators closing in on trapped prey. They were being surrounded. Blue lights ignited the backyard. Red strobes illuminated the side of the house. Sirens wailed, not slowly, not politely, but with the furious authority of agencies not bound by HOA politics or cowardly local departments. federal vehicles, unmarked tactical units. The father's ally had arrived. Not tomorrow. Not later. Now. Floodlights lit the entire yard like a stage. Commands erupted through megaphones. Boots thundered. The fake officers scrambled, breaking formation entirely, scattering into fractured groups trying to escape the collapse of their operation. But escape was impossible. Every path was blocked. Every exit sealed. For the first time since the nightmare began, the danger shifted away from the family and toward the men who had hunted them. And as the federal team advanced, the HOA's entire secret world began to unravel under the weight of a force far greater than intimidation. The morning air was crisp, carrying the quiet calm that comes after a storm. But inside, my heart still pounded. The events of the past weeks, the fake HOA cops, the attack on my wife, the night they tried to break in had changed everything. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was ready. Using the footage, GPS trackers, and every piece of evidence we had collected, the authorities coordinated a plan. This time, it wasn't me defending my family alone. It was law, precise, and unstoppable. By midday, federal agents moved in. The black SUVs, the fake badges, the men who had terrorized our home, they were caught off guard. Their hubris didn't survive the daylight. The operation was clean. Within hours, the HOA's secret network, those who had masqueraded as security, and even the corrupt board members who enabled them, were arrested. Their plans, their intimidation tactics, and their lies were exposed to the light of day. The files, the videos, and the recorded confessions became proof in court. The family wasn't just safe, they had justice. As I stood on the porch with my wife and son, watching the officers take the last of the men away, a sense of relief washed over me. The neighborhood could finally breathe. The house felt lighter, freer, and secure for the first time in weeks. Our home, our family, our land, it was ours again. The HOA that once thought they could threaten, intimidate, and manipulate us had been dismantled. Every move they made had backfired spectacularly, and I didn't have to lift a gun. The law and our preparation had done it for us. For the first time since the nightmare began, I smiled. My family was safe. Our home was untouchable. And the lesson was clear. Never underestimate the people you try to control. The sun set behind our house, golden and unwavering. Shadows faded. Peace returned. And we knew nothing like this would ever happen again. The HOA nightmare was over.